morning folks, we're talking whirligigs today. In our village we're holding what they call a Scarecrow event, where people are asked to display a homemade scarecrow outside the property just to cheer people up a little bit in these times. And I thought, well, as well as making a scarecrow to stick outside, why don't I make a whirligig scarecrow to stick on a pole just to entertain people. It's only going to be a simple thing. I'm not going to make it too fancy. This is my German Shepherd one, which you may have seen in another of my videos. I made this a year or so ago, and you can see it's got two simple movements on it. Just a German Shepherd dog chasing a burglar and a police van on the end which does nothing. It will be based on the same principles as this, only I'm planning to have a scarecrow, a largest scarecrow, probably 10 or 12 inches tall, with a crow or something on his arm, rocking about, allegedly pecking at the scarecrow. I might have a little mouse on the other end, but I'm only going to have a simple movement thing, so I haven't got time to do anything fancy. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show you some quick sketches I've made of the idea in my head, and we'll see how we get on from there. Now this is all trial and error, so you'll have to bear with me. These are just some rough sketches. I'm not very good at drawing. I've basically drawn what I think is a rough scarecrow character, and I've also done an enlarged, more simplified version. Simplified because I just need a pattern really to cut out on the fret saw, and then most of the features, the extra features on there, will be painted on, because you can't really do anything other than that. I did think about putting a nose on it to make a pointed nose, but again I might just paint that on afterwards, because a lot of it's in the painting. I just need the basic shape. I think that's about the right size. He's about 12 inches tall. You want it quite large to show up. I've now got to do a crow similar, so the next thing is really to transfer this onto a piece of wood, a piece of decent wood that will stand the weather for a couple of weeks, and cut it out. I've had a poke about in the woodshed, and I've found a few pieces of wood that might do for the scarecrow character. I've got this piece here which is fairly hefty. I think it's exterior ply. It's about 5/8 an inch thick. That would do. It is quite heavy. I've also found this piece here which is probably about 10 ply, I would think. It's only a bit of rough old stuff, but it looks fairly good quality actually. That will probably do. It's about the right size for the scarecrow himself. It is a little bit heavy though. I'm a bit worried about the weight. The other piece I've got is this old piece I was using to mix some putty up the other day, and it's not very hard wearing. It's cheap and nasty actually, but it might do for this, as I'm only going to do it for a temporary job. It's not going to be I'm not really making it for a long-term thing. It's not going to last very long, but if it lasts for 2 or 3 weeks, I think I'll do fine. So I think this would probably do. It's certainly not much good for anything else, and the pattern I could just about cut a scarecrow out. At least if I cut it out on this and then I change my mind or it all goes wrong, I haven't really wasted a nice piece of wood. I don't like wasting plywood, or any wood if that matter. You know me, I'm a scrimper. I don't like any waste at all. But I might just cut him out on here, and then at least I can see what he looks like, and I can use him to experiment with. And if I decide later that it's going to turn out alright and I want to make a longer lasting one, then I can cut him out again from some better wood. But so for now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to transfer the drawing onto here, and then we'll go to the fret saw, and then I'll cut it out and see what he looks like. But it is all trial and error, you understand, at the moment. Now to transfer the pattern onto the workpiece, what I'd normally do is print it out. I'd scan it into the computer, and that way I could resize it if I wanted to, and then I'd just print as many copies as I wanted out, and I'd simply paste it onto the workpiece, the timber, and then cut it out and sacrifice the pattern, knowing I've already got another one. But in this case, because it's only a rough sketch and everything, I'm not going to bother with that. I'm going to use something that a lot of young people today probably don't even know exists, and it's something we used to use for years and years before photocopiers and printers became readily available, and it's called carbon paper. It's basically just a special paper with an ink backing, and you place it under the pattern and then simply draw around it like so. I don't need to be too fussy with this because it's only a rough sketch anyway. Go around the whole pattern like that, and when you're finished you should eventually have the pattern transferred. It's not very clear on here, mainly because it's painted grey and it's all dirty, but it's perfectly clear for cutting. I can go over it with a pencil, the bits that are a bit iffy, It just gives me a rough guide to cutting out. As I say, I might have to adapt it later anyway. All of it's being done is from trial and error anyway, so it doesn't matter. And if this one doesn't work out, I can cut another one out because it's only an old piece of wood anyway. Anyway, that's carbon paper, folks. It was very useful in its day, not so useful now, but it's handy to have some about if you have got some. I'm going to use my Hegner fret saw to cut the figure out. You'll notice I've actually cut roughly around the figure using the bandsaw to cut some of the surplus wood off. This makes it a lot easier when you're cutting because you haven't got a big unwieldy board to do. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use the Hegner to cut the pattern out. As I say, it's only roughly, I don't need anything fancy for this. Doesn't matter where I start. You can do quite tight turns on a fret saw. There we go, that was easy, wasn't it? There he is. It's a Scarecrow. He's not very fancy, but he'll do. Very useful tool, a fret saw. If you haven't got one, why haven't you got one? They're a marvellous thing to use. You can actually use one on the kitchen table, actually, if you want. You don't have to have a workshop to use a fret saw. Got the Scarecrow figure cut out now. All I've got to do now is clean him up a bit. I've got, as I mentioned, there's some putty on him where I was using him as a putty board. So I'm going to use this old chisel just to remove any surplus putty, because if I don't, it will clog the abrasive paper up. So I'm just going to scrape as much as I can off. It's only a bit of dried up putty. I was mixing some putty up the other day, and you're wondering why I'm mixing putty. Well, I'm a scrimper and I didn't want to waste it. No, actually, I want to do some window repairs, and a lot of the shops are closed at the moment. You can't get out to buy stuff, and I want some putty to repair the windows, fit in around the glass. And I went to my shed and got some putty, but unfortunately it got into a hard lump. And I thought, well, how can I get it going again? So I got some linseed oil that I've had for years in bottles. So I thought, well, if I mix it up with the linseed oil, because after all it is linseed oil putty, isn't it? That should do the job. I don't know what I'm going on about putty for, it's nothing to do with it, but it's while I'm doing this, I suppose, it doesn't matter. So what I did, I used this piece of plywood as a mixing board, and I slapped the putty on there and mixed it up with this linseed oil and pummeled it about a bit, and actually it turned out quite useful, and I think I can actually use it. And the annoying thing is though, after I'd spent about 2 hours mixing this putty up and getting it pliable so I could use it again, I went in the shed and had another look, and guess what I found? Well, you know what's going to happen, don't you? I found a full tin of putty that I hadn't actually opened, which is still perfectly alright. So after I'd spent 2 hours, that's what happens when you're a scrimper. I'd forgotten I'd already bought a spare tin, so anyway, it'll come in handy for something else, won't it? Anyway, I've got the rough bits off there, so basically all I've got to do now is give it a rough sanding down and get just tidy it up a little bit prior to painting. You didn't think I was going to do all that sanding by hand, did you? I've done a rough sketch of the crow on this piece of plywood. You'll notice his feet, I'm going to leave that fairly solid because I'm going to put a pivot point probably in there. That's not very good. You see now that's going to chip up that part of his tail. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off a moment and I'm going to redraw that and see if I can get round that, because I don't really want that to happen. I'll cut over that way a little bit. I don't think that'll show too much. If not, I can cut another one out anyway. It's always trial and error. Right, there he is. That should do for now anyway. It looks a bit like a crow, doesn't it? I'm going to cut another one out, and I've made him a slightly different angle. I've made his beak point downwards a bit more, and his head's a bit more bowed, and the legs stick forward a bit so that he can be more in a pecking position, I hope. Where should we start? Beak. There we go. Now you'll see I've got another one. It's slightly different positions. His head's down a little bit more. Got two to choose from now, haven't I?